Welcome to day 2 of Insurance 2025 and to our opening spotlight session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Scott and I'm the editor of Insurance Times. I'm joined this morning by Nick Brown, Sales and Marketing Director at Markel UK, and Phil Barton, Chief Executive of Partners & who are both going to be sharing their insights with us on the future of commercial broking, in particularly around the SME market. So welcome guys, lovely to have you with us this morning.
Morning.
Great to be with you, Katie.
Fabulous. To start with, obviously SMEs have encountered a myriad of challenges really since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, and there's certainly a community that has been hard hit by the pandemic's financial ramifications. What would you say are the challenges here, and how can brokers turn these challenges into opportunities in order to offer support to SME clients? Don't know who wants to kick off first.
Yeah, Katie, I'm happy to. Obviously, the one unusual characteristic with the pandemic, of course, is the asymmetric nature of it. So some sectors have done incredibly well. If you're in logistics and home delivery, you're having a ball. Whereas if you're in leisure or accommodation, you're in grave difficulties. So SMEs are a very diverse population. Some businesses are struggling to manage their growth, and others are desperately trying to husband their costs. The challenge, I think, perhaps that's involved every business in the SME space, is people and cyber. I would say those are two risks which are preeminent across the whole economy. Managing working remotely, managing the mental health issues associated with lockdown is a major challenge for an SME business. Likewise, managing the technology and the additional risks of phishing attacks and social engineering attacks on their business is a challenge as well. So those two risks, I think, have come to the fore.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's the global crisis has posed those challenges, as Phil's highlighted. What's interesting for me is I think it's taken a bit of a global crisis for us to understand as an industry, right, that the customer being at the center of what we do, and they've all had challenges outside of the norm. So whether it's BCP environment, whether it's different risk challenges, no one had known what furlough was at the time, right? Customers were desperate to get people to help direct them, right, through this crisis, dealing with the challenges and the different challenges that posed. And I think that SMEs encounter challenges like that every day, irrespective of the global crisis. I think we as an industry have got a fantastic opportunity to broaden our relationship with the customer and be there to support them on advice, information, guidance, and widen that risk management relationship out of the pure insurance relationship. And I think that I've seen intermediaries in the UK do that very well in response to the global crisis, and long may it continue.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, one way of, another opportunity is in terms of providing different value added services that are perhaps over and above just meeting insurance needs, like you say there, Nick, about sort of risk management. Are there any sort of kinds of services or topic areas that you think SMEs might particularly need help with? And why would you think it's beneficial for brokers to think of their SME clients in perhaps this more holistic and rounded way?
Yeah, I mean, so from looking at it from the provider's perspective, from the insurer's perspective, and Phil will give some great insight in terms of the requirements from a broker's perspective. But for me, you've got the industry is coming out of a period of time where it's had the worst possible media attention for some time. The FCA test case, the publicity that the industry's had in terms of its response to customers having the difficulties related to COVID-19 and the lockdown means that we have some work to do to rebuild that trust with the customer. And I think that's the same for both brokers and providers. And dusting off the policy handbooks as the response to a global crisis to work out what's covered or not, is an unfortunate reality that some of the providers in this space experienced. I think for me, being able to place that customer there, understanding the risk management capabilities that we've got, proactive contact around supporting them from a legal perspective, widening it to a tax perspective. I think that there are many, many routes for us to have a wider conversation with the customer and understanding them other than just the pure risk for the insurance, which ultimately the insurance is there as a last resort. And I think there's a great opportunity through the added values to get in as a first port of call.
I actually think, in response to your question, Katie, there's also a view that we need to redefine what is our core service. I think the industry has become incredibly lazy in the provision of advice. It's dragged itself towards commoditization and the transactional approach. And everybody seems to be focused on placement as the arbiter of whether you win or lose a client. The fact of the matter is, most, if not all, brokers are competent at placement. And so, you know, the pandemic has challenged the marketplace to be more extensive in the advice it offers. So get back to the core elements of offering advice, risk diagnosis, risk advice, whether you retain that risk on your balance sheet or transfer it to the insurer. It's asking us new questions, I think, around program design as well, rather than just placement. And, you know, and ultimately claims, I guess, is the final arbiter of the service we can offer. Clients have been hugely disappointed by the fulfillment of the promise the industry has given them. And that's because the industry is over-focused on placement and under-focused on the areas of advice which can create a huge delta in the outcome for clients. So yes, there are lots of value-added services that we can add. And you know, we do as a business work very closely with firms that are in our ecosystem that extend our proposition, such as succession consultants, helping them prepare their business for exit. Growth consultants who are, their raison d'etre is to help those businesses grow. Now these are value-added services, absolutely, to build on what Nick was saying. But actually, you know, part of the challenge for our industry is get back to do what we're supposed to be doing better. You know, I'm embarrassed to say that we've disappointed many of our clients through this period.
Yeah, it's been a difficult one. And in terms of taking that forward, then, if sort of there's going to be you'd like to see really this enhanced focus on going back to advice, obviously that could mean more partnerships in terms of specialising with other firms who perhaps have different areas of expertise. So how do you think brokers can perhaps target and grow the right partnerships that will help benefit that end client? And what do you think makes a really successful partnership?
Well, partnership is the golden thread that runs through our business. We're brave enough to put the concept of partnership above the door within our brand. So partnership means everything to us. Partnership with our clients, partnership with our people, and partnership with our ecosystem. Of course, our insurers are a part of that. Our view of the marketplace is that it's become incredibly short-term and focused on transaction, and we want to call that out and think about long-term mutually beneficial relationships. The reality is, if you're going to create a constructive partnership with a third party, then you need to have a commonality of purpose, you need to have a commonality of values, you need to have a culture which is consistent. So starting position in any of the ecosystem partnerships we create starts with, do we see the world in a similar way? Do we have the same values and the same commitment to serving clients and offering the very best advice that we can offer? And so without that, we will never strike a partnership with a third party. And with that, you can achieve amazing things. And so for us, proposition is second. You only get to explore whether the proposition is going to add real value to the client if culturally you're aligned and you believe and trust in the firm you're partnering with. And we have a formal process for determining that with any of our ecosystem partners. In fact, I was in 2 meetings yesterday with potential ecosystem partners. And our approach is, look, unless we can believe and trust in each other, we should call time on this. And shake hands, wish you well, but accept that we're not going to work in partnership. And that's as important as committing wholeheartedly to a partnership.
Yeah, I think that from the insurer's perspective, Markel is all about the capabilities and the partnerships that we build with brokers, with the proposition that we have and the investment that we're making in that strategy for our growth, being a specialist, focusing on key client sectors, going deeper into that client relationship, both in terms of the way the insurance is provided, what else do they need as a support, and making that available to the customer and to the intermediaries, what we're all about. And I think that we are desperately kind of using the last 12 months as the yardstick to go, hey, look at the quality of the engagement that you've had, because of this crisis. We've been forced into it, but actually this can be a BAU piece of work. It is the strategy to go down, and from a partnership perspective, working with ourselves and others like us, right, to be able to put the customer at the front and center, is exactly what we're hoping that we can do with intermediaries. And the strategy that Phil's talking about, we fully endorse and support.
I've got to say, Katie, without embarrassing Nick, our work with Markel over the last 6 months has been a complete breath of fresh air. We started with a very clear articulation of how we see the world, how we see client service, how we see the marketplace, and have collaborated in a way which I think is incredibly rare. Focus our activities on specific segments of the marketplace where we have distinctive competitive advantage, and we're both committed to exploiting. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Nick, to be working with you and your team.
No, look, and vice versa. I think that the key is the partnership element that you've talked about, Phil, and that common strategy around the customer, I think is critical. And look, we've heard about intermediaries driving growth, right, for years and years and years. It's always been on in and around the agenda. And the reality is, in terms of organic growth, there's very few intermediaries that put their hands on their heart and say they've done it in that time. And that's where broadening out the proposition, the understanding of the customer, gives you more to talk about, right? It gives a broader conversation for the customer, enables people to go further in that discussion, which means you can differentiate yourself when you're looking to try and win a piece of business, but also gives you something more to talk about than just a renewal, right? And focus on broadening out, which makes it stickier, makes the customer have more value, and creates more revenue generating opportunities. I mean, what's not to like about that?
Definitely, it's great to hear such a success story, really, in terms of the partnership you guys have. So you say then that perhaps a partnership-led approach can help future-proof brokers' businesses moving forwards?
Absolutely. The marketplace has been dragged into commoditization and dragged into a transactional approach. And if you adopt that approach, you live and die by it. If you win a client on price, you'll lose it on price ultimately. So working in partnership with a broader practice, a broader set of ecosystem partners enables you to differentiate your proposition and move away from that transaction. So as Nick says, you can establish yourself as really relevant to the client firm. And as a consequence of that, you become their trusted advisor. I know that's a hackneyed phrase, but the essence of it is fundamental to the relationship that a broker should be having with their clients. And if you achieve that status because you are their center of influence, because they come to you for advice across a broad swathe of issues that they face, then you can guarantee that you'll improve retention, you'll improve referrals, you'll increase the revenue you generate from each of those clients, and those clients will remain with you for longer. And as Nick said, there isn't a successful broking advisory business in the UK that doesn't depend on world-class retention rates. Anything that drives retention because you're more valuable, you're perceived as part of their team, is a fundamental ingredient to a successful advisory business.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's always difficult within this kind of these discussions, because what we've been talking about is pretty difficult to argue against, but getting people to adopt it, to understand it, and to take that to heart, it always feels like you're trying to get people to change. I think that there's an element where taking time to look at the environment that we're in, take the PI market as an example. I've had many conversations, especially over the last 3 months, where the cycle of the market in terms of hard and soft markets, price increases, capacity coming in and out is accepted as the way it is, right? So brokers are having a really hard time at the moment because placing and finding capacity, finding it at a price that isn't driving a huge increase to the customer is the big challenge at the moment, right? Well, when you actually think about what's causing that, right? The commoditization, the overcapacity by short-term insurance provision, facilitated by brokers trading on price, right? This cycle has to stop, right? Because it causes problems. It causes negative conversations for the customer. Bizarrely, prices today are actually at the same level as they were 15 years ago, right? We've just seen them gradually decline over that period of time because of the capacity in the market. Now, the customer's risk hasn't changed significantly in that time, just the price. So, you know, looking at what we do every day, right, in the industry, and looking at that through the customer's lens like that, you know, is why you've got to differentiate and change, because that as a cycle drives small, short-term, unsustainable returns for everybody, and it's got to stop.
No, definitely a really valid point. And I mean, you guys also touched on earlier about different sectors having perhaps different needs and different reactions to the pandemic. So obviously there's some work there in terms of commercial lines brokers looking to tailor perhaps what they do between different sectors. I mean, how would you go about this really? What's the sort of steps that can be taken there?
The fact of the matter is, at least in my view, the best advisors in our marketplace tend to have a specialism. They tend to have immersed themselves in an industry sector. They've become connected with that ecosystem. They understand the language. They have a insight into the risks that are prevalent within that sector. So they can engage in a way which a generalist broker can't. So I absolutely see the need for specialism and focus on specific sectors. You can add considerably more value by understanding a sector better than a generalist broker. We have, though, developed a broader approach to advice. If you like, we've created our own Partners and Way, our own advice methodology, which is a core that runs through the way we work with clients. And that's nuanced by sector, but the IP, the intellectual property that underpins our advice methodology is consistent. And we believe, you know, those steps of risk diagnosis, risk advice, program design, placement, implementation, and claims are consistent across all clients. How you apply them depends on the sector that the client is within. So our challenge, I guess, as an advice-led business is firstly to establish that process consistently every time with our clients, but then nuance it to suit the sector that the client is focused within. And we're doing some great work on that. Our technical and advice team is leading the way, I think, in redesigning the way advice is served in the industry.
I think on the provider side of things, I mean, it mirrors entirely. I mean, our strategy is all about the sectors, and like I said before, going into the deep understanding of the wording, making sure it's appropriate. You know, with care is a really good example of this. You know, historically, and for many years, people have been placing care risks on commercial combined composite level insurance. And some of those are silent or not covering abuse, as an example. Well, in the care industry, where that's the #1 challenge that they have to deal with, right? That doesn't make sense to be able to be giving advice to customers where that's not being considered. So I think that's been something that actually the industry's responded well to, the brokers have responded well to in my time here. And I think that can go on. If I look at what was historically perceived as straightforward transactional risk, right? That the risk advice that goes into kind of placing business. If you look at retail, hospitality, you've got entertainment, right? It's historically been something that you'd say it's got some foibles, but risk placement is relatively straightforward. Well, not in the last year, it hasn't been, has it? Right. So there's a piece where it's always changing, and you've got to keep ahead of it. So, you know, understanding the customer, breaking down and being an expert in your field means that you can provide the customer with a deeper knowledge, and that's, again, it's not a bad thing, is it?
No, definitely not. And you guys have also touched on trust in the insurance sector and how perhaps, to put it mildly, it might have taken a bit of a nosedive perhaps due to the test case action. What impact do you think brokers, and particularly commercial line brokers, can have on their local community in terms of moving forwards past the pandemic and the test case action, you know, utilising this holistic, perhaps partnership-centric model?
Well, firstly, we're a chartered firm, and part of being chartered is to give back to the communities in which you operate. So we're very proactive in that from a CSR perspective, from a charitable perspective. In terms of the ecosystem creation, though, that in itself builds the local community. You know, a part of our ecosystem is our partnership with a law firm in the local community, a partnership with our growth consultancy, a partnership with the succession and exit planning consultancy. These are all local businesses that we connect. So we're inveterate networkers. We take pleasure in introducing the services of trusted ecosystem partners to clients where we think they will add value. This is not about creating revenue for ourselves. It's about delivering for our clients across a broader spectrum of services. And you know, when the industry has become very short term, and some would say have been exploiting clients for their own ends, we think that client service lens is what will differentiate us. Simply looking at what is right for the client will ultimately create loyalty, which will then drive outstanding financial performance for our business in the long term. And it's that philosophy, that long-term cadence of broking, which I think is forgotten and has been shown to be much more beneficial than a transactional approach, which is at the root cause of some of the problems the industry has faced over the last year.
And look, we're lucky in the UK, right? From an SME perspective, it's a growing, blossoming marketplace. 25 years ago, I think it was 9 out of every 10 new SMEs failed in the first 12 months. Now that's been turned on its head. So we're very fortunate. We're a very mature, very well established marketplace. And we've got to be able to respond to that. If you look at and learn from the perils of the pension marketplace, the life insurance marketplace, in terms of what commoditization has done, living, you know, I remember in pensions in particular, the buzzword was living in the 1% world, right? Providers making 1%. I mean, that's not sustainable, right? Especially when you start driving that from an insurance risk perspective. There is a commoditization breeds that same mentality and gives no room to breathe on that basis, which is why we see capacity rise and fall. So, you know, we've got to take that maturity, that excitement, that stability of the marketplace and respond accordingly.
That's really interesting. And just before we finish, I just wanted to touch on consistency. Obviously, that's something that's going to be pretty important coming up in terms of that consistent support and being there for businesses. But I also wanted to touch on consistency in terms of Markel, as you guys have been awarded 5 stars in our commercial lines rating report now for 3 years on the trot, which I think demonstrates pretty decent consistency there, Nick.
Yeah.
Why do you guys think consistency is so important, really? And how can brokers ensure that they're delivering consistently for their clients?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides to it. So I think consistency is synonymous with trust, being very honest with you, right? So there's a piece which is if you genuinely trust your provider as a broker, and you can pick up the telephone, and it's about the service standards, it's about the wordings, it's about the delivery. No, we set ourselves very high standards internally at Markel in terms of the way that we want to behave. We invest in that, and those standards are right the way across the business, from point of claim to point of quote and everything in between. And we're still on that journey, right? I mean, we've been growing steadily alongside those 3 years ratings that you said, and we want to continue to do that. And our ambition is to double the size of our business over the course of the next 5 years, which is an aspiration that we have firmly embedded in the quality about what we do. So consistency is about where our strategy is, the way we execute, the investment that we give, and the standards that we set internally, as well as what we want to be judged against externally. So long may that continue, and we're always open to listen if we're not doing what we should be doing in any cases. So it's a constant cycle of feedback.
Look, for my part, I think one of the issues that's been prevalent in our marketplace over the last year is that clients simply have not understood what they've been buying. Partly about the opaque nature of policies and some of the covers we provide, and partly it's about an inconsistent approach. And I think if we adopt an approach which is about helping those clients understand, being more transparent in the covers, then that will build trust as well. And then delivering upon it. Of course, it's no good having transparent wordings, etc., if then you don't deliver upon them in a consistent way. Doing what you say you're going to do is absolutely, being reliable is an underrated value. Being there when your clients need you is an underrated value. I'm telling you, we need to return to those fundamentals. They're fundamentals of client service. If the industry can return to those and get away from trying to generate cash in the short term from policies which generate bad profit rather than good profit, then we will prosper, and we will most importantly help our clients prosper.
Yeah, absolutely. What's also great to see, by the way, and the Insurance Times survey identifies this, is that we're not a sample of one. It's brilliant to see other insurers kind of coming up in terms of their capabilities and their commitments to the market, that they're taking their ratings very seriously. And the 5-star allocations that have been kind of awarded by brokers, I think it's fantastic. And that competition is what we want to take all day long, because it's healthy for this industry.
Definitely, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much, guys. That's all we've got time for now, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to your views on these questions around commercial broking. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Nick.
Hi, guys. We are now going to dive straight into taking some questions that you guys have been sending in. So first of all, we've had a couple of questions come in around SMEs buying insurance in the future. So someone's asked that post-pandemic, how likely do you think SMEs are to buy insurance due to the reputational hit? And again, someone else sort of linked to that has also asked that historically SMEs have not always bought insurance, and whether post-pandemic this will change. So both of those kind of cover a kind of similar topic. So it would be quite interesting to get your views on that. I don't know which of you wants to start.
I'm happy to, Nick.
Go for it.
I'm feeling optimistic this morning, and I think the marketplace post-pandemic is going to be buoyant for advice-led businesses. There's no doubt in my mind that businesses are more risk aware than they've been. They're more risk averse than they've ever been, and that they are in need of advice. So if the pandemic has done anything, it has encouraged businesses to be more aware of the challenges and issues they face, and are more aware of the need to seek expert advice. So that's a challenge to our market, I think. And I think it's the death knell of a transactional approach. We need to get to advice. If SMEs don't buy our service, it's because our service is not delivering for them. So we need to get away from this price-led transactional approach and move to delivering a service that SMEs want to buy. That's a great opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I fully share Phil's optimism, and I think that what's great about it is that there's that old saying of there's no such thing as bad publicity, and it's true. It creates the kind of the conversation, it creates the awareness, but that's only positive if you learn and change from it. So, to Phil's point about the transactional, the kind of what Phil made a great point at the end of the video around, customers know what they're buying. And I think that they're lessons that we've got to learn, and we've got a platform to engage on that basis and really kick on. So I'm really buoyant about the future and about the opportunity it creates, because anything like this gives an opportunity to reflect and to adapt. So long may that continue.
No, definitely. And also, how can brokers prepare their SME clients for future lockdowns and uncertainty? Obviously, no one really knows what's going to happen over the course of this year. So what are your views on that?
Well, yeah, I sincerely hope that we don't have any more lockdowns. Manage to navigate these last few phases successfully without creating another spike, of course. The business of managing uncertainty is what we're in. That's what our clients buy. It's the heart of what we do. And in the video that we have just listened to, I talked a lot about risk diagnosis. Our job is to be the risk team for our SME clients. We should be part of their team, mapping out the landscape of risks and helping them navigate them. Some of those risks might use insurance as a solution, but others might use some risk management intervention to mitigate some of that risk. Some of them might simply be accepted and be on the balance sheet of the client. That's okay, but we should be focusing on being risk protection advisors for the future, protecting the business against uncertainty. That's our reason for being, frankly. And so that's what excites me about the future.
Yeah. I think that's the exactly. I think that there's a piece which is like understanding risk, being closer to the customer, listening to them, understanding. When customers have got challenges, even if those challenges don't directly pertain to the insurance risk that the engagement's around, that gives the opportunity to broaden the conversation, to add value. So I think that the risk advice approach that Phil's talking about absolutely provides the right level of protection and support for the customer in the future, but being able to draw on a whole range of advice, guidance, information and support as an intermediary when these things happen, so that you can take the role of guiding the customer through it, I think is equally as important. Risk advice will protect for the future, react and respond to today. So that's definitely something that is a key strategy of ours.
I talked about it in the original video. Risk diagnosis is a live or die moment for our SME clients. If we get that wrong and we leave them unconsciously exposed to a risk, the outcome is potentially that business fails. There's a huge delta in getting it right or getting it wrong. And it's the same with claims, by the way. If we don't recover a business effectively after an incident, the delta is significant. It can be the difference between that business surviving and recovering or it going under. So those responsibilities at the risk diagnosis end of our process and at the claims end of our process are mission critical for our clients. Placement, where everybody wants to play, is a marginal gain activity. It's not existential. And I think we've got to reframe where we invest our efforts, where we invest our capabilities and resources so that we meet the needs of our clients rather than satisfy our own financial targets and goals.
That's so interesting. And we've had another question come in about whether you guys feel that insurers across the industry will adopt a similar approach to you guys at Markel, Nick, in terms of the added value partnerships, or is it something that can only be offered on certain lines or products?
Yes, I saw this question come in, and these are great opportunities and tee-ups for us to extol the values of Markel and our strategic proposition and how innovative and unique we are. So thank you for having sent that in. But there is a reality, which is it's not about the products, it's about the customer, right? So the customer buys products. What they experience, taking a sector, taking an industry type, looking at a customer type, they have shared challenges, they have shared requirements, they have shared expectations, of which our products are just a number of options that they've got to be able to manage risk and protect that risk, as Phil said. So there's a bit for me, which is we should all be understanding our customer at a deeper level and ensuring that not just our insurance is going to respond when it needs to respond. I mean, that's the basics, right? And we've let them down in certain cases, in certain examples. But it is about generating that wider benefit. So in short, yeah, I think that's where the market needs to go for the SMEs for us to be able to bounce back stronger after the last year.
I think to Nick's point, the client gets a better outcome if insurers and brokers partner together. The challenge is that it's become quite adversarial between brokers and insurers, that there's a wrestle for a win-lose outcome, whereas distribution gets more of the share of the cake, and that leaves insurers with less resource to invest in a broader proposition. That's flawed thinking. If we focus on the client, as Nick says, and we partner in delivering a solution which is meeting their needs, then we'll all prosper, including the client, of course.
No, definitely. And what impact do you think that the pandemic, in particular quarrels with certain insurers? I know we spoke about the test case during the initial talk, but what impact do you think this has had on customer trust and SME customer trust in particular?
Yeah, I'd say, look, it's certainly not going to do it any favors, right? So that's the reality, that there is a piece where we've seen a huge backlash, especially against certain providers in this space. And look, there is an opportunity to change that dialogue, right? There's a number of, whether it's the cycles, whether it's, as Phil said, that kind of horse trading that's been going on historically, right? It's around sustainability, right? Because sustainability by definition can't exist without trust. Right? It can't, right? That openness, that transparency, that commitment for doing the thing for doing what we need to be doing for the long term is all about that trust. Those moment of truths, you can't be sustainable if the first time you get challenged, you let people down, right? And that's the same for providers and insurers. So do I think that the industry's taken a battering on the trust side? Yes, right? Does that mean that we are all in the same category? Definitely not, right? And as a result, there's opportunity there. So I think that customers want us and need us to be successful. And that's the reality, and we should focus more on that.
Yeah, look, it's undoubtedly a challenging and difficult moment, but it is an opportunity.
Yeah,
it's an opportunity to acknowledge our shortcomings. If we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, then we're destined to repeat them. And so it's a challenge for the industry to become more relevant,
yeah,
or valued by our clients. And some of the things we talked about over the last 45 minutes or so point to where we need to change, or at least I think we need to change as an industry if we are going to improve our reputation and become essential partners for our SME clients.
No, definitely. And perhaps looking a bit more towards the future, what new and emerging risks have come out of the pandemic for commercial lines, in your opinion?
I know Phil's got a couple of things that he likes to, that he's identified within the partners and strategy. So I'm going to let Phil go first on that one. And I'll follow.
Well, the one thing I would say is that designing programs in the way we've done before is not sufficient. The idea of focusing a program on property and casualty and wheels is not going to cut it. The world has changed. There are emerging risks. You know, the cyber risk is a huge risk, and I think people have become much more aware of that as a consequence of lockdown and the pandemic. I also think the people risk issue is huge, whether that's succession or the exposure and business interruption risk associated with a key man, or whether it's share protection issues and challenges that all businesses face. So people issues and cyber are key. And I think, you know, we live in a more litigious world than we've ever lived in. So management liability and the advice around that, contract dispute, is critical. To Nick's points around the legal services that Markel offer, I think they're highly, highly valuable. And then, of course, that plays into professional risk. The whole risk of offering advice, design, consultancy, and the PI market, of course, is a challenging market right now from a capacity perspective and a price perspective. But we need to be proactive in those four areas, as well as the typical property, casualty, and wheels-based risk focus that we've had in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was hoping you were going to say about that, particularly about the cyber risk, because for me, the cyber proposition that has evolved for SMEs over the last years, it's obviously been quite a big topic, quite a new kind of area for people to discuss. What's really fascinating for me is all the things we've been talking about, you know, this morning around getting close to the customer, providing values, not just about insurance. That's epitomized in a cyber insurance policy, right? Because it's as important that you're giving customers access to the services that they need at the point of a problem as it is ensuring the outcome, right? So if there's something we've learned out of this with what's happened in the last year, actually last 3 years, cyber comes in. It's really identified that it continues to be a challenge, right? Even more so in the last 12 months. And we've all embraced a product, which by definition is service-led. Doesn't have to be just on cyber.
No, definitely. And sort of linked to that then, what gives you the most optimism about SME insurance when we look forward to the next, say, 5 or 10 years?
It's going to grow. So, I mean, the market is going to grow. And I think that we're going to see the benefit of two things. I mean, that sustainability about price, hopefully the hard market that we're experiencing at the moment, right, we can try and ensure that we taper and continue. But at the same time, that does drive value, right? But the SMEs, you know, as Phil said in the video that we saw earlier, it's yin yang in terms of COVID-19. Many customers have significantly blossomed in the SME space as opposed to those that have been challenges. So we might see the inevitable recession, but I think that strong organizations, strong SMEs have got great opportunity to grow, and I think that will continue. We've just got to place ourselves to be ready to handle that. And for me, the optimism comes from the intermediary community. For me, as a provider, they are the voice of the customer, they are the access point to the customer, and the response that I see, you know, the strategies that we see from intermediaries like Partners and others in terms of their commitment to risk management and putting the customer at the center of what they do, fills me with huge confidence about what will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. It's all about growth.
My optimism is grounded in 3 areas. As Nick said, it's a vibrant sector. It's the engine room of the economy. So I want to be a part of a growth sector rather than a sector in decline. Secondly, I think we live in an ever increasingly complex world. So there will be continued emerging risks that clients need advice on. And I think thirdly, there is an opportunity for us to seize the power of technology and to use technology to enable SME advice. So that's not substituting for it through some sort of price comparison. It's actually about using technology, using AI, using machine learning to create insight into our SME clients that otherwise we would not be able to get. And then that insight can inform our advice and enable us to deliver high quality, tailored advice to relatively small clients in a very effective way.
That's really interesting. And we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to pick one more question. So thank you for everyone who's been sending them in. Does pressure put on consolidators by money investors always push agenda to profit and income over positive client outcomes?
So that was a nice, easy one snuck in right at the end there, wasn't it?
I know, just throwing the curveball at the last minute, why not?
Look, I think that everyone's got various financial pressures that they need to manage too. Right? There's various different strategies that exist in the marketplace, and we've seen that consolidation for years. Right? One of the things for me on it, which is maybe a sidebar, but there is a point which is your local broker that had risk management, client management, and the customer at the center of everything they do is a big part of that consolidation model. And we all know that was because ownership of that in terms of age, future potential, that was ripe, because otherwise these intermediaries would have disappeared potentially, right? And customers then not had a bit. So I think market circumstances have created that as a real kind of powder keg of opportunity. And I think that working with the consolidators and the pressure that they're under provide an opportunity for providers, because there is short-term growth that can get out of that kind of activity. I think we go into it and work with our brokers in that space with a long-term view, with a sustainable model, and that's one that we will stick to and urge others to do the same, because it's not going to go away. It's positive in terms of rescuing the opportunity for local customers to still get access to that, and we support it.
The process of consolidation isn't really the issue or the challenge, really. The fact of the matter is that scale is over rewarded in our sector, and when scale is over rewarded, it's very easy for capital to come in with a bold strategy of just buying and building and adding businesses upon one another, and then leveraging the supplier for more commission or more fees, and that makes the notional value, but it doesn't deliver anything for the client proposition. And the reality is that if you're a consolidator that's a part of that process, you end up paying over the odds for the assets you're acquiring. And that then means you wake up the next day having acquired an asset that you paid too much for, thinking about how you're going to make sense of the financial model thereafter. And that's what drives some of the practices in our industry, I think. If you don't buy for scale, but you buy for capability or client proposition or geographical reach, then you don't need to participate in those sort of bad profit policies and practices which our questioner is asking about. So it's a choice. If all you do is seek to financially re-engineer the businesses you acquire, then I think it's bad news for the client. Ultimately, he gets caught in the crossfire. If you acquire a business because they bring unique capabilities that you can extend to all of your clients, then that's a positive thing and something that should be celebrated.
Definitely great answer there, guys. Well, that's all we've got time for this morning, I'm afraid. Thank you to both Phil and Nick for joining me this morning. It's been wonderful having you with us, sharing your insights. Really appreciate it. I think the next session on the agenda will start at 10 o'clock, which is a really interesting panel debate. So hopefully you will all be tuning into that as well. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.